All right, welcome to another movie review stream. I don't talk about home videos much, but yeah, I got a lot of movies to talk about. So, welcome to the stream. My name is Mark McPherson, movie critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. And I have been very, 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 very busy with the amount of films that I've been going through. As I've said, it's award season, so the screeners have just been piling up in piles. In fact, I even have like a bunch. Like, this isn't even all of them. This is like just a small portion of the of the screeners that I've got there. So there's a lot that I've got to cover. In fact, I'm not even going to be able to cover all of them today. So I'm going to try to cover as much as I can on this stream. And then maybe a little bit later in the week, I'll cover a little bit more. But yeah, it's a busy time. So what films are we covering today? I'm going to be covering American Fiction, a new racial satire starring Jeffrey Wright. I'm also going to be covering the big film that everyone's been talking about, Godzilla Minus One. The latest Japanese Godzilla film. We'll also be talking about some other bigger hits coming out. More awards-friendly films coming out this fall. Anatomy of a Fall has been out for a while, so we'll be talking about that. Also be talking about the upcoming film Ferrari, the latest film from Michael Mann, starring Adam Driver. And we'll also talk about a few more commercial films that are on streaming right now, including Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, and It's a Wonderful Knife. Oh, and the other one I was forgetting, The Zone of Interest is another one that I wanted to talk about. So we'll talk about all that. If you'd like to read any of the reviews of movies I talk about here, you can visit my website, movieswithmark.com. That's where I most commonly post them. And a lot of these... few of the films we're talking about here are actually early reviews. Like I believe like American Fiction, Ferrari, and The Zone of Interest are not out entirely. If they are out in limited release right now, and they will be expanding more this Friday. So if you like those early reviews like that, this isn't even like everything that I've got to talk about, but if you want more early reviews like this, be sure to like this video, subscribe. You can stay informed on the latest films that just keep piling up over here. So without further ado, I will pull up the notes and we'll get to the big one everyone's been talking about since it's been a box office titan. We'll talk about Godzilla Minus One, because why not? How many times do you get to talk about it? Like 2016, the last time we got a Japanese Godzilla film. All right, let me bring up my notes on the side here. Make sure I got all the names up, and everything will be good. All right. Okay, and here we go in 3, 2, 1. So Godzilla Minus One is the latest Godzilla film from Japan. Big distinction there because yeah, we have a lot more. We have had quite a slew of American Godzilla films that have been coming out lately. In fact, there's another one on its way again with King Kong once more. But the Japanese Godzilla films of recent, between this and the other film, Shin Godzilla, back from 2016. It's interesting to see how Japan has developed the giant monster in this new iteration, because it's between like Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One, which I'm going to talk about. It always feels like these films are about something more than just the giant monster. Now, don't get me wrong. Godzilla is pretty cool in this film. You get to see him do the usual cool stuff that you expect Godzilla to do in a giant monster movie. But what makes this film more interesting, and what easily makes Godzilla Minus One one of the best Godzilla films of the 21st century, is that it feels like it's about something more than just the carnage and just the destruction and just about... And it's not just about, who can Godzilla punch next. It's actually, there's a human, as many people have mentioned. It's very much a human story, and you get that when you turn Godzilla into more of this force that represents something bigger that the humans have to conquer over. Much like the original, which is why it's no surprise that Godzilla Minus One goes back in time to try to find something more to do with the era in which Godzilla was created. Because, as a lot of people have talked about with the original Godzilla, it was meant to represent this kind of, like this fear and anxiety that came about, after the war, and this lingering notion of just like destruction and terror. So it was very much, about something. It was as much a human story as it was a giant monster film, with the big rubber suit and Godzilla smashing up everything. And like I said, like with Shin Godzilla, it felt like it was about something more. Like it felt like it was highlighting the bureaucracy that would go on around handling a Godzilla attack, where it was gonna just treat it like it's a normal thing. And with Godzilla Minus One, it's more unique because you care a lot more for the humans in this story than you do Godzilla. I mean, Godzilla's cool. It's like this giant menacing force, but if he's supposed to be the villain, you've got to have human characters worth rooting for. And the human story within Godzilla Minus One is fully developed. So the story follows. It takes place after World War II, and Koichi Shikishima is a kamikaze pilot who basically chickened out. He tried to pretend that there was something wrong with his plane. He landed on a nearby island and just said, like, it just chickened out. He said, like, I can't, fly to my death. I don't want to do it. And it made sense too at the time, because like the war was almost over at that point, so there was no point in, throwing his life away. But he still had that guilt within him that he wasn't living up to something more. And that guilt is further exacerbated when the island comes under attack by Godzilla, and Shikishima is given a moment to kind of like defend his troops and save the day, and he doesn't do it. He chickens out again, just because he's terrified of dying and would rather save himself than throw his life away for something that he doesn't feel would happen. Because they're fighting Godzilla, and you know how it always goes with Godzilla. Oh, this weapon will work, and then, oh, guess what? That weapon didn't quite work as well as we thought it would. So from a survival standpoint, it makes sense why Shikishima, would flee, but at the same time, he feels guilt about not having, stuck up for everyone else and, tried to save the day in some way. So he tries to carry on after the war. So he ends up hooking up with Noriko and a little girl called Akiko. And it's basically, they've kind of formed this family bond out of tragedy, because they've seen so much death and destruction around them. They've lost their homes, they've lost their families, and this is all they have left. So they just kind of band together and kind of form this family unit. And as they try to survive, Shikishima is constantly traumatized by the war. Like, for him, it hasn't ended yet, and he has to find some means of trying to come to terms with the guilt about, about being a pilot who, didn't live up to the expectations of being a kamikaze pilot, and also not being able to stop Godzilla. Now, thankfully, or more or less thankfully, he's given the chance to defeat Godzilla again when he takes on a new job with a group of other former naval engineers who work on a boat trying to dismantle mines that have been placed in the sea. And while they're doing this, Godzilla pops up again in the waters, and they're tasked with trying to help out and make sure that Godzilla doesn't terrorize the rest of Japan. So Shikishima is given another chance to do this, but again, he's still terrified. And why wouldn't he be? Because they do set up Godzilla as a major threat. He's, at one point they're beating him back because they're like shoving mines into his mouth on this little rickety boat. But then, give Godzilla enough time and he'll use his atomic breath and just blow up, an entire battleship right in front of them. So, of course, the naval engineers, they come together and they realize they've got to find a better strategy to defeat Godzilla. And it requires, backup plans, and then backup plans to those backup plans. But eventually, of course, they will end up defeating Godzilla because the not just because they have to force back Godzilla so that he doesn't obliterate the rest of the world, but because it's thematically appropriate for all these naval officers feeling that there's lingering elements of the war that they have to get out of their system, and that they feel like they have to live up to something more, especially in an environment where they feel like they've been cast aside. Throughout the film, that there's this, they constantly bring up the fact that that Japan has just kind of tossed them to the wayside. Like, even at one point, when on Shikishima's boat, when they're dismantling mines, they realize they're meant to slow Godzilla down, and that they're more or less like bait. They're just meant to slow him down, and they could end up as casualties. And they're just kind of oh yeah, that's typical. That's what they've always done with us. So there's this feeling that there's so much anxiety that lingers on from the war, and distrust within the military, and living up to the expectations of protecting everyone when it feels like that's not even happening, with all the problems that happen in post-war Japan. So you're kind of rooting for Shikishima because, he loses a lot, and even as he's struggling to fight back against Godzilla, there's the closer that he would get to a victory, there's always a little bit of defeat along the way, and these feelings that that he's basically just helpless. There's nothing he can do at certain points. At one point, it feels like he's lost everything, and an entire city is decimated, and he's just reliving the same trauma again, and just breaks down in that moment. And it's just, and your heart goes out to him that, that by the time you get to the third act, you're kind of cheering him on to make sure that, as he keeps saying throughout the film, that he can finish this war within himself, as the film keeps going. So yeah, it's very much a human story, and I love how much time we get to spend with Shikishima, as well as a few other characters, like the tech engineer of Kenji is really interesting. What's his name? Shikishima's former engineer superior also comes back into the picture, but it takes some convincing to basically building up trust again, which I guess is a bigger theme throughout the film, because by the end, when Godzilla is finally defeated, there's this sensation that, that all these people have come together, and that they've kind of learned to build up trust again, especially when it's dwindled in such short supply, when trying to handle this, this apocalyptic situation with Godzilla on their hands. So very much a unique and intriguing human story that that even the many times that Godzilla is not on screen, it's still a fascinating drama to watch unfold. That being said, if you are coming into this film looking for Godzilla action, you will get a lot of it. There's a lot of the classic Godzilla city stomping with great detail. He smashes up buildings, get to see people get crushed under his feet. You get to see his atomic breath, and oh my god, when Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath, and you see, and when you see his back glow and just shoot up, like an energy reactor starting up, about to emit this giant explosion from his mouth, it's exciting. It's still, even when I was watching with the American Godzilla films, whenever they do that, it always gives me goosebumps just for the build up and the anticipation to the big giant explosion. And then when it happens in this film especially, you feel that power there, because Godzilla's destruction is just horrifying with with how much carnage he causes and how much human misery you see come about with it. So it's very much like a Godzilla film with stakes on the line, where you're not so much rooting for him, especially when you've gotten used to these characters enough that you don't want to see them just get crushed under Godzilla's foot. So yeah, you're as much intrigued by Godzilla as you are with the human element of the story. And I want to frame this by saying that even though I love Godzilla Minus One, I'm not opposed to more of the wrestling match Godzilla films, where it's less about the human story and more about who's Godzilla gonna attack in the next film, which Japan has done a ton of. So, it's not just like an American thing with our current monsterverse, whatever you want to call it. And for as fun as those films are, like they're fun in like, like a they're fun like candy. Like they're not that, they're not that like great for you on like a human level, but they're just kind of like fun to watch the carnage and action unfold. But with Godzilla Minus One, I was surprised by how much I found myself invested with this story, where it doesn't just feel like busy work for our human characters to do before Godzilla gets on the screen. It's like, especially the actor who plays Koichi Shikishima, Ryunosuke Kamiki, is just amazing with like how he goes from from being very cowardly to being very traumatized to being very conflicted about how he feels about trying to move on with his life at one point. Like there's this constant like will he, won't he with Noriko, when it seems like, it should be obvious that they should take their relationship to the next level. Like they've already proven themselves that they can raise a kid. So you're kind of waiting for that moment as well, but you're also rooting for them because, it's something that Shikishima feels like he hasn't quite earned yet, because he's terrified of, others being reliant on him, because he feels like he's just going to run again. And not in kind of like, it's like very much like an instinctual thing where, he doesn't want to die, obviously, so you got to flee from Godzilla, but at the same time, you don't want to see other people die. So it's this very big internal struggle with Shikishima that makes him such a fascinating character, and really make you root for him in the end, where it's basically just, of course, you can kind of see where this is going. It's gonna come to a showdown of Shikishima versus Godzilla, so that we can kind of bring this war to an end, and it ends so beautifully with this big battle at sea, where they're trying to find the most scientific way to destroy Godzilla, and it requires everybody working together to make sure that they can save the day and that nobody else dies under this carnage. So yeah, on that level, Godzilla Minus One is easily the best Godzilla film of the 21st century. So Godzilla Minus One is currently playing in theaters right now. And it should probably be there for a little bit, because I know like some of these Toho films are only in theaters for a little bit. But I think like it's done like really well at the box office, so I think they're going to extend the theatrical screenings for a while. So if you can, check it out, because I imagine it's probably going to take a bit of time to get this on home video. All right, let's jump right into the next one. Let's get over to American Fiction. Where are my notes? Here they are. Okay. And this film is in limited theatrical release right now, and it will be opening, expanding, if you will, this Friday. Meaning you will most likely be able to see it in more theaters. I say most likely because Christmas is usually packed with screenings, so, fair warning, it's probably not going to be in as many theaters as you think. So, all right. So here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So American Fiction is a new satire starring Jeffrey Wright as... and this name is so bizarre here. It's a... Oh, pardon me. I could feel the... Sorry, I got cinnamon tea here, and I could feel it in the back of my throat. And that's why I had water here to do that. Okay. Take 2. Let's get the notes up here. Turn that on. Turn this on. And there we go. Here we go. All right. 3, 2, 1. So American Fiction is a new satire that's all about race, identity, and publishing and how far you can get with trying to, kind of manipulate people into believing something. So the premise is that Jeffrey Wright plays this author called Thelonious Monk Ellison. Most people call him just Monk because, Thelonious Monk, which is kind of like a cute little way to set up the fact that this character is just a little bit, stuffy in his ways, just a little bit. He's a little bit smug, but he's a novelist who's struggling a bit to sell a new book. And the problem is he's finding that, he can't quite come up with good ideas that, that his agent will be able to pitch and that publishers will want to buy. And he could really use some money right now because he's just had to endure the suicide of his father. His mother's getting ill and she's getting up there in age where she's going to need to go into a retirement home, but he wants to try to find a good one for her. He's also kind of struggling to, reconnect with his gay brother Cliff, played by Sterling K. Brown, who kind of feels like he can come back into Monk's life, especially since, he never quite came out to his father. And also because he has because Monk has a crush on this new woman, Coraline, played by Erica Alexander. So he basically needs to sell something fast, and he figures, well, I've looked at, there's this other author I've been looking at. She's called Centaura Golden, played by Issa Rae, and she's basically been able to sell kind of the ideal kind of like black book, like the idea of kind of like African American story that white liberals would kind of like gobble up because it's like loaded up with kind of like, like white guilt and stuff like that. And it's something that clearly Monk doesn't really want to write, and he kind of despises it a little bit. But then he figures, well, you know what? If this sells, why don't I just make something up? So he makes up this new identity for him, and he kind of like writes this kind of stereotypical book about like the black experience in America, and calls it My Pathology with an F instead of a TH. And then he basically just, kind of plays it up in his head. He tries to feel like, oh, is this black enough? Should I make this like more street or something like that? Would they buy it? And at first it's just kind of like a joke to see like, let's see if the publisher will buy it. And then he's kind of shocked that like, oh, they actually do want to buy this. And now I've got to commit to it. So then he starts staging this character for himself. He starts playing up his accent over the phone. And if you've heard Jeffrey Wright, he's got like this very deep, refined voice. So, trying to make him sound like he's got like more of this, like expected urban vernacular for like this type of person to write this story. Is kind of funny, and how like he's basically kind of like rubbing his temples, while trying to come up with this character over the phone, just like, yeah, okay, I'll go through the motions to try to sell this book, and see if I can make it black enough. And at first, like, he's, it's a big deal because like it's a huge contract. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm getting lots of money for it. But then as the book becomes more and more popular, it just spins out of control. And at that point, like, he's almost kind of like desperate to try to find a way to kill it, where even when he tries to negotiate a different title for the book, like he names it the biggest expletive that you could put on a book, figuring that, oh man, like this is going to tank it. There's no way that they're going to publish the book with this profanity on the cover. And they do. And it goes further and further at that. And at that point, it's just like, this is like a beast that Monk feels he can no longer control. And is just kind of like, he's like, what do I do at this point? Because then he gets more frustrated because, he wants to write something better, and he wants to decry, the thing that he's written here, that when other people start gravitating towards it, he starts getting, like disgusted with them, and it starts ruining relationships for him. It becomes really conflicting when he's on a committee for awarding authors, and his book turns up on there, and he's basically trying to make a case against it, but only him and Sintara are on this, like this author council, and the rest of them are white, and they're all just like eating this up while they're trying to say like, no, it's this is kind of like a garbage book. But even like even on that level, like you expect like, okay, Monk and Sintara Golden are going to connect on some level, and surprisingly they don't, because like Sintara sees something more in the way that these books are crafted, in particular in her work. Because like the other thing too is like Monk is very smug about the type of stuff he wants to write, and how and how like books are written by certain black authors, that he's very critical of her work as well, and they come to blows in a very interesting way, where it feels like, even though Monk feels like he understands like, what he's trying to push here and what he's trying to satirize, he might not have the clearest path. He might not have like a good idea in his head about where he wants to go with all this and what he wants to say as an author. So, the idea of this film, like this is a premise that could have fallen apart quick. It's like, it's a funny idea. It's like, here's like, a black author who doesn't write, like the black American experience that like white liberals would want to read more of. And then, playing it up, saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to play up this character. And the thing is like, that's funny for like an act or two, but then you got to find something more to do with it. And what I like about American fiction is that you get to like Monk more as a character as it goes, and you get to relate more to like the characters around him. Because it doesn't just remain locked in that world of publishing. It actually has like some quiet, funny moments, especially between Monk and Coraline. Like they're pretty sweet together, that you hope that they'll end up together. I also like the back and forth between like Cliff and Monk, who come to blows a little bit of the time, especially since Cliff is more extroverted and more outgoing, and and Monk is just a little bit in his own world and can't quite relate. So they have a bit of chemistry there as well. Especially, I really loved a bit of dialogue they have between each other, where Cliff almost kind of like wishes that his father was alive again, so that he could tell him that he was gay. And then Monk says like, well, what if Dad wouldn't accept you? He's like, yeah, but I'd still be truthful, and I'd know for certain if Dad would approve or not. And it's that certainty and that closure that you really want, that to be more authentic. And I feel like that's like the biggest draw for the film, is Monk's quest to be genuine and trying to like sell a story, but also realizing that like there's a bit of like a societal expectation on him for what counts as like more in terms of like both like popular reading and more acclaim for certain literary works. Him realizing that it's tough to kind of like be authentic in that world, especially when you get to the end of the film, and it's just this brilliant kind of like like meta commentary on like how you would choose to end a story like this, where Monk's like ideas go forth in his head about how he should end this particular story, and like there's a bunch of like different ways posed that would seem more acceptable to audiences. Like they try out one ending where it's kind of like more like a romantic comedy type ending, and then there's another more absurd ending where it ends in like violence and it turns into like an action film. And I feel like that's the best way that you could end this type of story, is to just have it be this battle about how other people would perceive like this type of character going through this type of story. With just pitch perfect dialogue here. Like I love the way that the satire is divided up here. Like the whole like like the whole satire on like publishing and how race plays a factor in that is brilliant. But then, like I said, There's some sweet moments there. There's some very human moments where you get to know and like Monk, where you're kind of rooting for him, but at the same time, you're kind of like hoping that he'll wake up a little bit to the monster he's kind of created here with this fictionalized character and this fictionalized book. That, you know, like, I mean, like you're waiting for the dominoes to fall, and thankfully they don't quite fall until the end, and it doesn't give you like that, and it doesn't focus on like the fallout of that. Pretty much because, like, you know, it feels like there's as much satire as you could evoke, and until like this, you know, this little scheme kind of ends, and it proceeds right up to the moment where at least I believe, like, it should end, for this type of film. And throughout it, it's hilarious. It's got great heart. It's got great wit, and it's a fantastic performance by Jeffrey Wright. He just kind of dominates this role of this very insecure intellectual guy who wants to try to prove himself as a writer, but doesn't want to be kind of pigeonholed to one thing that like publishers and other authors would expect of him. And it's just it's just genuinely funny. I was surprised by how much great dialogue there was in here, and just Wright sells it. So yeah, it's a great American satire. So that's American Fiction. That is playing in limited theaters right now and will be expanding into more theaters on Friday. Okay, so let's see. We covered American Fiction. We covered Godzilla Minus One. Let's talk about Anatomy of a Fall. All right, let me get my notes up here. Some more tea. All right. Okay, look at the notes. All right, and here we go in 3, 2, 1. So, Anatomy of a Fall is a mystery. Well, it's kind of more of a courtroom drama for the most part. But it's a film that centers entirely around someone's death after falling out of a window. Now, the person who fell out the window is Samuel Voiter, played by Samuel Thesis. I think that's Samuel Theus. And his murder is not, well, it's suspected that he might have been murdered by his wife, Sandra, played by Sandra Hüller. And here's the thing, like, we don't see the death actually happen. Like, we see the setup here where we see that we see that Sandra is a novelist who's living in like this snowy French region with her son, who is partially blind. Her son is Daniel, and Daniel decides to go out for a walk with his dog while Sandra has just kind of finished up recording an interview, while her husband was just like blaring his music, and just, you know, they have as the film goes along, it shows that, yeah, they had a very bitter relationship with their conflicts about their career, and about moving, and about how to raise their son, and about how to handle his education, and they just kind of came to blows with each other. And then, you know, after Daniel goes out for a walk, he returns home, and his dad is just lying there dead in the snow. And the police arrive, and they try to, they try to figure out what was going on. And it's suspected that Sandra was the murderer in this case. So it's basically, the rest of the film is Sandra trying to prove that she was innocent and that she had nothing to do with the murder. So for the most part, like, this is like a courtroom drama, but I love the way that the film plays with the idea of deciding whether or not she was innocent. Because, like, I don't quite want to say it's like a murder mystery, because, like, there is no, like, grand reveal where you see, where, you know, like, they have like a flashback and they show you what actually happened, in that event where Samuel died. But I love that because then it forces the audience to kind of like decide whether or not Sandra was innocent through all this. So you're constantly paying attention to her testimony, all the details that are revealed, all like the recorded conversations between Sandra and Samuel, and you're just you're just staring at that, staring at everything here, trying to piece it all together. And a lot of credit goes to Justine Triet doing the direction here, and I love the way that that the film is shot in the courtroom, because there's several moments where the camera is kind of like placed directly in the audience, and there's like a little bit of like blocking from some other people in the courtroom. So you really feel like, you are in that situation yourself, kind of like judging Sandra when she's up there, trying to like make her case in front of a courtroom. The same goes for like, when like they bring Daniel into the equation. You feel like you gravitate a little bit more with Daniel, like he has a little bit more of a grasp on the situation, especially when Daniel tries to basically kind of tries a little bit of his own experiments to see, how this would go down, in addition to like all the other evidence of like recreation that they do. Like they stage like events at the house to see like, could someone fall from this height, smash into this part of the house and then fall down to their death? Would it make sense with like, how the blood is here? And they kind of try to make their case here, and like the investigation keeps going further and further and further. And I love that it doesn't end on like a perfect resolve. Like, I mean, it feels like, like for the most part, you spend most of the film with Sandra and her lawyer, Vincent. And you feel like she is, you feel like, like either she is innocent here, or there's going to be like some big twist where they prove her innocent and then it's secretly revealed that she was behind the murder. But there's no like clear motive here. Like the way that the film ends, a lot of people have like this debatable discussion of whether or not Sandra murdered her husband in this situation, given all the motive, given all the evidence here. And yet, the way it ends, it ends in a way where it feels like Sandra could either be innocent or guilty from like the way it plays out at the end here, with just this kind of like almost almost this kind of like this restful nature by the end of it, where you're just relieved that like the investigation is over. Because like it's like such a grueling experience. Like you see like the media circus, you see like the conflicts with the family, the way that like Daniel gets like torn apart from Sandra and all this, and how they have conflict with each other. And there's, like you're constantly just thinking about, how is this trial going down, and like, what is being used to smear Sandra here, and what feels accurate to, attributing her to being a murderer, and what is just dogpiling on her, trying to, find the easy answers to make her a murderer. So it's probably one of the most fascinating courtroom films that I've seen in quite a long time. Like, I think I did mention like one of my favorite films last year was Argentina 1985, because I liked that. I really liked that courtroom drama because it was expertly directed. It's perfectly paced, where you get to know enough about the characters. As a real life courtroom case, I loved Argentina 1985. But for Anatomy of a Fall, as a fictionalized courtroom drama, it's brilliant, because it doesn't like give you like the perfect answer. Like, you're not placed within any one side of who you're rooting for here, and it's kind of, like it's debatable here. Like, I'm sure like, if you go through the film like 2 or 3 more times, you might be able to like piece everything together here. It's like, aha, I have figured out who the murderer is. But I love the way that the film just kind of like lingers on the moments that you might not think about as much in the trial here, like the way that Daniel remains separated, to remove like any influence or bias that he might have in the courtroom at that time. In addition to that, just the way that Sandra forms her relationship with Vincent has you questioning a little bit of her motives as well, in a way where you're kind of you're kind of fascinated by how like how Sandra maneuvers her way through this, especially with how she just kind of like jumps between languages. Like she goes between like French and English a few times, which is which is fascinating because like it's almost kind of like you feel like she's going into like a certain mode, the way that she like transfers like that way, just like kind of like almost effortlessly in the courtroom, that you're kind of like just leaning in a little bit more, trying to figure out what is going through her head. It's like if she is innocent, is this tactic working, or if she's trying to get away with murder here, like is she doing enough here to clear her name of all this? So it's just like a fascinating mystery that doesn't have like a concrete answer and a very ambiguous ending to it all, that I could not stop thinking about, especially with Sandra Hüller's performance is just fantastic in this, because like she really does have to walk this tightrope of not making it clear what her real intentions were in all of this, and making her very believable within that courtroom setting. And I think like I said, the way it's shot, like where you're kind of like feels like you're in the peanut gallery here trying to judge yourself, it really helps that like Sandra Hüller is up there trying to like make her best case for a woman that you're not too sure about. And on that level, like her performance is just amazing in this. In addition to like a little bit of credit also for the son Daniel, played by Milo Mercado-Graner. And just his performance is just great too, because he has just as much like fear about proving innocence here, and looking out for the safety of others as much as his mother does. That you kind of feel like that there is a connection between them, as well as a bit of distrust that is going on. So just an amazingly fascinating film, and just fantastic performances, expertly shot, and just the way that it intrigues throughout with a mystery with no like 100% clear answer by the end. It's just such a brilliant film. So yeah, Anatomy of a Fall it might be playing in a few theaters. It had its bigger opening in November, but it should be arriving on home video within like the next month, or probably like VOD, I think, because it's neon, so I think it takes a little bit of time. But it will probably be. I know they're pushing this for more for award season, so chances are it'll probably have like a bigger release come January. All right, so we got a few down. Let's get to some more. Let's get to another film opening this Christmas. Let's get to Ferrari, directed by Michael Mann. Oh, we got that there we go. Okay, so here we go with Ferrari in 3, 2, 1. So Michael Mann's Ferrari takes place in 1957 and follows the central character of Enzo Ferrari, played here by Adam Driver, who does a pretty decent job with trying to pull off like a little bit of the Italian accent here. Not a great job, but compared to some of the other actors here, he does a much better job, I think, than some of the other actors. So the film follows a very crucial point in Enzo's career, trying to establishing Ferrari as like a big name car brand. Like basically, he's like his one big shot to kind of like prove himself feels like it's going to be this big upcoming race, I'm trying to pronounce correctly, the Malay Miglia. I think I'm butchering the title here. I know they say it in the film, but it's tough for me to say. But it's basically it's a 1,000-mile race to kind of prove who's going to be the expert driver over some, basically like racing across Italy on this very long and arduous, race to try to prove yourself. So Enzo figures that, hey, we need a good driver for that. So how about we hire Alfonso de Portego, played by Gabriel Leon. And it feels like, like this is going to be the racer to do it. Like after much testing, trying to find like the perfect racers, to represent his cars, feels like, yes, this guy's going to do it. This guy's got, like the essence of being like, a star race car driver. Let's put him in the driver's seat and let's do it with him. Now, while all this is going on, Now, while all this is going on, Enzo Ferrari is having a bit of trouble in his personal life. Namely, he's not, it's basically his marriage kind of feels like it's crumbled with his wife, Laura, played by Penelope Cruz here, where they, it feels like they're not marriage partners anymore. They're just business partners. Like at this point, Laura pretty much knows like Enzo probably has like another woman on the side, and she's just, she views him more as like a business partner than anything else, and kind of distrusts him more than anything else. Like, and she's like, Penelope Cruz just throws herself into this role, especially with like one scene early on where she basically is just wielding a gun around their estate, just like, I what can you say? Like she likes her gun and she likes to kind of fire it off around Enzo, much to his chagrin. And of course, as we soon learn, Enzo did have another woman on the side, with a woman called Lena, played by Shailene Woodley, and they both had a child together that has been kept in secret. And I'll say this, like Cruz is really great in her performance. Driver, I feel, does well. For most of the time, I feel like he holds his accent pretty well. Shailene Woodley just doesn't really work here, unfortunately. Like, she's trying with that Italian accent, but it dips in and out so much that it becomes distracting. Thankfully, though, she's, even though she's like playing, the role of like the other woman here, she's not as present in the film as much. Like she's there throughout, but not as much as like you get to see with like Penelope Cruz or as with Adam Driver, even with Gabriel Leon. And I like the way that the film is kind of paced between like, divvying up between, Enzo's personal life and his professional life, and a little bit of crossover in between there. Like you see a few sweet moments where Enzo is with his kid, and, he's showing him all like these blueprints for his car design, saying like, oh, this is how you make a better car. Hey, do you see anything that we could do to fix this? Like, yes, that's what we do. And there's a charming, heartfelt moment there. But it's also very somber moment as well, because you realize that Enzo and Laura were trying for where they had a kid, but they lost their child, and now when they can't have another one, Enzo basically wants to go to another woman. And it's depressing because more or less Enzo's mother kind of agrees with him on this level, mainly because like she's all about wanting an heir for the business, where it feels like legacy and business have kind of like ruined these people, where they don't really feel like themselves anymore, to the point where it kind of makes sense that Enzo Ferrari would just bury himself in this work of trying to like be the best and trying to rise above all else, feeling that as long as I get the car right, as long as I can win this race, everything is going to be just right. And then of course, for those who are familiar with the story, Alfonso does not survive the race. He has a horrific crash that ends up killing lots of people, and it's brutal and it's shocking, and it's that chilling climax there that reminds you how you can bury yourself in as much work as you want, but anything could go wrong at any moment, and you could lose it all just like that. And it's a very sobering moment, I think, for Enzo to kind of like realize something a little bit more about his life while kind of watching it all crumble around him, and just realizing that you kind of have to make the best with what you got, and more or less, but you kind of like see like the decay going on within like this guy who was very obsessed with cars, and it kind of created this very like rocky legacy for himself. And I kind of went back and forth on this film because, like, the pacing is pretty good. Like I said, I like the deviation between the personal life and like the life of, establishing a car brand. The racing scenes, which I imagine quite a few people are going to come to this film for, are decently shot. They're a bit they're a bit rickety here and there, but I feel like they're appropriate for where they're trying to, like, showcase, like, like the speed and the grit of it all, because you want to feel like, you're in the driver's seat of these cars that, like, if you're not careful with them, they could easily just topple over and just, end up, you could end up dead within these things, which they established pretty early on. You have to be skilled with these cars, because you're not, accidents are going to happen, and there's going to be some pretty dire consequences for it. And I mean, I like that, like that the camera is like a little bit shaky in some of those scenes, like not like, all over the place, but, having like those bumps in there where it feels like, these cars are going fantastic speeds, and that they might not be able to hold if they don't have an expert driver behind the wheel making sure that they're running properly. So the way they're shot, I feel like they're pretty good. I went back and forth a little bit on the big climax here, where you have the big car crash here, because it does show a lot of the brutality that came with that crash, which is a little bit questionable, because like it's shocking. And it's a little bit of a gamble, that scene, and I kind of feel like it mostly pays off, just because I feel like there's a hideous undercurrent throughout the film that you want to kind of see kind of explode in that climax and showcase the horror of what happens, when like an accident would happen like this on the track, and to prove that, you can try to build up your legacy as much as you want, but, it's going to, much like Enzo and, his first son, you could lose it instantly, just like that. It's a fast industry, and if you move that fast, and, you're struggling for money as well, which, Enzo does, even though they established that Enzo really didn't have to put the struggle on, but he had so much dignity that he felt like he had to kind of, put his, like, kind of, put everything he had into this to try to, like, prove himself. And which is a little bit sad, just because, like, you realize he didn't have to do this, and that if he didn't, some people might be alive, even though, like, it's something that he couldn't quite foresee within that scenario. So, like, it's this great highlight about, this guy who tried to have, like, all this pride and tried to cover up his shortcomings, and, for as much as, like, the Ferrari brand kind of, like, succeeded, past these events, and, went on to become a bigger company, it still had all these problems, both with how they ran races, and with, Enzo himself, and how he, ran his company and his family. And yeah, I like the way that it highlights this troubling aspect of this character. And Driver's performance is really good. Crew's performance is really good. And Woodley's really isn't. But like I said, I went back and forth on this film, and ultimately I kind of dug it for what it was trying to explore with Enzo Ferrari, and I think just the performances alone are what made the film work for me, in addition to some decently shot racing scenes that did kind of feel like they were kind of like amping up the grit of what you wanted to feel, of what I almost kind of feel like Mann wanted us to feel within that race. So yeah, Ferrari, it's definitely not Michael Mann's best film, but it's a pretty good film about trying to explore this both aspects of Enzo Ferrari as this troubled family man and an even more troubling businessman. So Ferrari will be playing in most theaters on Friday, and we'll be expanding a bit more on Christmas. All right. I'll try to like. I'm gonna try to like breeze through these next. I'm gonna cover like the next big one here that I want to cover, which is the zone of interest, And then Chicken Run and It's a Wonderful Life are gonna be brief, just because I don't have too much to say on them. And also, I don't want my voice to run out. And trust me, I'm limiting myself on how many films I want to talk about. There are too many. All right. So let me get my notes up here. All right. Okay. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. So The Zone of Interest is the latest film from Jonathan Glazer, who we haven't seen Jonathan Glazer in a while. Like, the last film he directed was Under the Skin from 10 years ago, which I absolutely loved that film. So I was greatly looking forward to seeing what he was going to do based on this book about the Holocaust from Martin Amis. And this is a very intriguing subject matter, because this is a film all about a Nazi commandant who lives with his family in this, nice house with a great backyard, and it's got a pool, and they can raise their kids there, and they got some decent help there, and it feels like their kids can grow up in a good environment. The only issue, you'll immediately notice, is that they are directly next to a concentration camp. So every day, Dad goes off to work at the concentration camp, where he's trying to find the best way to eradicate Jews in the most effective way possible, while there's gunshots and screaming and pain and torture just outside their windows of the home of Commandant Rudolf Haas and his family. Rudolf Haas is played by Christian Friedel, who does a great job playing this very, very quiet performance of a man who tries to remain kind of, tries to remain reserved in the work that he's doing, and try not to let it kind of spill out into his home life. Because what's most fascinating about this film is that we see this film almost entirely from the perspective of the Haas family, and within their house, which is brilliantly shot with these kind of a lot of these shots that feel like we're getting a lot more depth in this house, where it kind of feels like we're trapped in this environment. And then, with great audio design here, where the family just goes about their normal day-to-day lives, they read books, they do chores, they have meals together, they have little parties, they have they play in the pool outside, they have plants that they tend to, and they tend to their little baby. And then just often not too far distance, there's people screaming, there's people dying, there's gunshots, there's smoke coming up from the incinerators where they're destroying people, and they're just trying to not think about it. Like, it's just, it's like for, people who would live next to a freeway, they treat it like a dull roar. And it's, and you look at that and your human reaction is this is horrifying. How could you live next to this? And that's kind of the horror of this film, is that, there's all this inhumanity going just next door. Like, you can see the smoke from the incinerators right from their window. You can hear everything. You can hear the guards talking to people they're shooting. You can see the children overhearing it from the window, and they treat it like it's just another day, just another normal day, and that the few elements of horror that do come about are kind of shooed away quickly. Like, at one point, Rudolph takes his children down to the river to kind of play, and then he realized that, the river actually has a little bit of spillover from, the dead bodies, from the concentration camp. So he kind of quickly ushers his kids out of the river very quickly before they can notice anything. Even though, it feels like this thing he's trying to keep his children away from as much of this as possible, even though, there's only so long that you can do this. There's only so long before, they're going to figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's just, there's this grotesque undercurrent to it all. Where like it's like the most sobering moment is when is when the grandmother for the children comes to stay with them for a bit, and she loves their house, she loves like the way their backyard looks and everything, but the more that she stays, the more that she comes to, you know, recognize the torture and the gunfire and the incinerations that are going on right next door to the concentration camp, and she's horrified. Like, you know, like this is probably normal for Rudolph and his kin, but not for Grandma. Grandma like pretty much just leaves unannounced after like a night there. She's like, no, I you know, you can probably deal with this, but no, I'm not gonna stay here. I also really loved the performance by Rudolph's wife, Hedwig, played by Sandra Hüller. And I love her performance because, like, while Rudolph is kind of trying to maintain his family unit, Hedwig is trying to do the same thing, but she's like very forceful about it. Like at one point, like the conflict here is that Rudolph has been reassigned, like he's got to, you know, attend to, you know, other Nazi business at a different base. And basically Hedwig wants to like stay behind with the children because she doesn't want to give up on this paradise that she's established for herself. And you would think, you know, if you're being relocated, you might be, you know, because they're right next door to Auschwitz. You would think that, you know, it might be better for her children not to grow up next to a concentration camp. But that's part of the problem, is that they've grown so used to this scenario and grown almost accustomed to, you know, putting up with all the gunfire and the screaming to, you know, justify this paradise that they've made for themselves. And you're just, you're like, you know, you understand this perspective because you spend enough time with them, but you're also like, you know, you recognize like these people are inhuman in the way that they are willingly ignoring all this just so that they feel they can have this peaceful family life. And what I love so much about Glazer's direction of this is that there's a lot of moments of contemplation where we're given moments to just kind of like sit with ourselves and try to question, you know, how much of this we want to remain, you know, that you want to remain as passive. In particular, I like the way that the film begins and ends with a little bit of like a music interlude, and then just like sitting in like the darkness, just trying to, you know, like understand, like, you know, like how, like, you know, more or less that silence would be like complacency within like this scenario, which the Haas family has pretty much kind of chosen in this scenario. Like there is like I do like how there is more aspects of horror that come about where there's a little bit of a side story where this Polish girl is shown in the darkness, kind of like secretly supplying food to the prison work sites for the concentration camp. And they're interestingly shot. They're kind of shot in like this kind of like black and white night vision, while this very foreboding music plays to kind of like show you how even someone who's trying to like do the right thing is putting themselves at risk, and they're like, you know, very close to being in the crosshairs of ending up dead in this scenario. And then you contrast that with like, you know, like kind of like the day-to-day life of the Haas family, in which, you know, the most concerning thing for them is like, you know, do we have enough food for this event? You know, did the dog go to the bathroom on the floor? Do we got to clean that up? Do we need to make the beds? We got to read to the children. And there's always like, you know, something that these characters are fighting back. They're trying to pretend that they have like a stable life, you know, for being, you know, a family of, you know, a family of Nazis, trying to like believing that this is all normal, that this, you know, just living next to a concentration camp is just, you know, like the price you pay. You know, it's just like it's they feel like, you know, it's just like airplanes going over them. You know, like, okay, we're on a flight path, big deal, but, you know, concentration camp. And I love how the film, one of the things I love most about the film is that when you get to the climax, and this might be a little bit of like a controversial ending for some people, but when you get to the very end of the film, you're watching as kind of Rudolph descends into darkness, and there's a big jump in the timeline where it skips immediately ahead to showcase something like the modern day Auschwitz, which has been transformed into a museum. So like there's this big contrast between, you know, what went down at Auschwitz and how we view it now. And what's fascinating is, you know, jumping between that is like the one thing we never see is we never get to see the horrors that went inside, that went down inside Auschwitz. You are not shown like the torture and the violence and the horror and the bloodshed, even though you hear it. You can hear it. You can see like the smoke coming up, but you never see any of the details of it. So and then immediately after that, the film just cuts to black and just, you know, puts on the music and lets you sit there for a moment and think about, you know, how much of this atrocity do you recognize if you're not there and seeing it? Because like one of the fascinating things I love about films that are, that try to be historical dramas is that they try to bring history to life. Like whenever I saw like war films where they showed like the grotesque bloodshed and the loss of life, it made it feel real and gruesome and visceral. And there has been films about the Holocaust to that same degree as well. But Zone of Interest becomes more fascinating because it dares to ask, you know, when you don't see everything, but you know it's there. You can hear it, you can sense it, you can imagine it in your mind, and it's just treated with passivity. Because like the stuff they show at the modern day Auschwitz Museum is just the staff cleaning it, just maintaining it, just like it's there, it's silent, and we just maintain this portion of history. But but there's still that questioning of how much of that weight do you feel when you don't see it, like when you're just hearing accounts of it, especially like, within Zone of Interest, when it's treated with people who just treated it like a very just passive thing, like, where the one thing they were concentrated most on is, how can this device and how can this operation kill as many Jewish people as possible? With that passivity, do you recognize the horror in all that? And it's a question that the film kind of silently poses to the audience, the way that it ramps up to, that ending where, like I said, it cuts to black and it just punches you in the gut at that moment to realize, you've just watched a Holocaust movie where you're not actually shown the victims, and you've just shown the aggressors and the people who did nothing during all of this, and you've only gotten like a brief glimpse of people who were a little bit of allies in it, or more or less recognize the horror, and it forces you to kind of like question, like, how much, do we recognize and how much do we feel about this when other people felt nothing? And just on that level, the film is just so fascinating to that degree that it just sits with you, and I can't stop thinking about the film. So yeah, it's definitely one of those Holocaust films that I'm going to be thinking about for the longest time. And just fantastic performances, and just Jonathan Glazer makes this material work so much and say a lot for what's essentially just, a family right outside a concentration camp who tries to ignores all the horrors. And it's not a comfortable experience, but in terms of trying to make you feel something for everything that went down with the Holocaust, I think Glazer kind of nails it here. It's a very profound film. So yeah, The Zone of Interest should be playing in a few theaters right now, and I feel like it's going to expand. I do know it's going to expand more in January in the UK. So you might be able to see it in a few theaters now. But if you can't, it will be playing more in January, and it has been making the rounds of like the Critics Awards and nominations, so keep an eye out for it there. Okay, so I wasn't gonna say this, but I'm gonna have a bite-sized review of Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget. Just a very brief one. Okay. So, Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, the latest stop-motion film from Aardman Animation. I really do love Aardman Animations just because they're kind of cute and they feel like they have their own charm that you don't get from any other animated film, even from other stop-motion animated films. It does have its own kind of style and wit that I always look forward to in these types of films. And even though Dawn of the Nugget is a sequel to Chicken Run, and make no mistake, it's very much a sequel. And to ensure that you know it's a sequel, they play you some of the footage. They give you a little bit of a recap from the last film because, I mean, let's face it, the last film was 23 years ago. You need a little bit of a refresher. No one's like chomping at the bit hard for, to see what's going to happen in the next Chicken Run film. And honestly, like the premise didn't thrill me. It's basically more of the same. It's Miranda Richardson, voices Mrs. Tweedy. She's back again. She wants revenge on the chickens, and now she's working in this big factory with advanced technology. No more of this like simple farmer stuff where, we're going to bring out the axe and stuff like that. Now we've got machines and we've got devices that can manipulate and mind control chickens, and I'm going to get my revenge on those chickens because I guess, Tweety can't let go of a grudge. Which I guess it's kind of funny that, she still has it out for these chickens, even though, why would she care? She's got like a thriving business that, she can murder tons of chickens, like with great efficiency at this place. I don't know why she cares, but at any rate, there's, basically the chickens from the last film, they've established a new utopia. They live on their own. They live in this great community. You have, like Ginger, voiced by Tandy Newton, I keep mispronouncing it, voiced by Thandrie Newton. She's still like the feisty chicken leader. You still have Rocky. He's still a little bit of like of a cocky rooster daredevil who wants to constantly prove himself, which I was kind of underwhelmed by Rocky. He's a very eccentric character, but he never quite played off anyone, which I kind of felt bad for because like you have Ginger who's giving out like orders and trying to like basically try to like tame her daughter Molly in the film, voiced by Bella Ramsey, and like as a mother figure she has a good like mother-daughter connection, and I like the way that she is a leader. Rocky is just kind of like the accidental hero for most of this. Like he tries to help and just ends up screwing things up a little bit here and there. Like he's not like, it's not like he has like a much of a redemption arc. He just kind of like stumbles his way into helping here and there, which most of the chickens kind of do anyway. So it's not that big a deal. It just makes Rocky feel like more of like a side character than than he probably was intended to be, because like all the other big side characters like are back here as well, and they basically have to save Molly, Ginger's daughter, from being, after she's taken in by Miss Tweedy's new chicken killing factory. So yeah, it's basically a rescue operation where they've got to break into this building and save a whole bunch of chickens from being murdered. And that's more or less it. And on that level, it's like, it's not that intriguing of a story. But on that level, like if the story isn't intriguing, the animation and the comedy can still be fun. And most with most Aardman animations, I don't worry about that aspect. And thankfully, there is a little bit of charm to the picture in that degree, because like the stop motion still looks great. They get a little experimental here and there with the type of stuff they try out here. They have a lot more characters that they're working with here. They have like bigger environments. I like that the factory has all these like ridiculous tech to ensure that, you know, they keep all these chickens under lockdown, because apparently Tweety has learned her lesson from like the last time she dealt with chickens, even though this feels like overkill, but apparently it was kind of worth it because she's dealing with, you know, pretty smart chickens who know how to like break other chickens out of factories. So yeah, it has some decent slapstick here and there. Like I said, the character chemistry isn't quite there, and I wish it had like some more absurd bits in there just to kind of like make it more, a little bit more original. Instead of just being like, you know, like another like, you know, chickens breaking out of the coop type deal, with just like more robots and a few more sci-fi elements thrown into the mix. I wish that there was a little bit more to it than that, because I honestly, all I can really appreciate the film on is the animation, which does look good, and some of like the slapstick bits, which are kind of funny. I smiled here and there, but yeah, in terms of like a sequel, it's very, very underwhelming, and it's and especially for Aardman animation, like I've only really been very underwhelmed by what's that one? Early Man. Like that one just didn't do anything for me. And Dawn of the Nugget came close to being on that level of Early Man. I will give it credit because like I did like watching the character of Ginger. I loved the dynamic between her and her daughter. And the animation does look good. And for returning these characters, I think they find enough new stuff to do with them. Just not as much with this premise. Like, it does feel like they're kind of locked in the box of trying to, you know, make a fairly safe sequel that treads on the same ground as the first Chicken Run film, which is a bit of a disappointment. So yeah, it's not Aardman at their best, but, you know, even Aardman, when, you know, they don't have the best story, they still have some pretty good animation, and they do have some decent sight gags here and there. So yeah, don't go in expecting Wallace and Gromit or Shaun the Sheep. It's definitely not on that level. But, you know, for returning the Chicken Run, it could have been much worse. It could have been a lot worse. But yeah, it's definitely not one of my favorite Aardman animated films. So yeah, Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, playing on Netflix. We already covered Zone of Interest. And finally, I'll cover this very briefly because I can feel my voice. It's cutting out. And I'm out of tea, so I'm going to spill this quick. So over on Shudder, there's a little horror film called It's a Wonderful Knife. And it's very much in the same vein as a horror film that came out this Halloween called Totally Killer, which is basically, you know, Back to the Future, but what if it was about, you know, someone going back in time to save their parents, you know, from a slasher villain. It's a Wonderful Knife is pretty much the same thing, but with, you know, it's a wonderful knife. It's basically It's a Wonderful Life, but with a slasher element. It's basically the story of Winnie, played by Jane Widdop, she's basically like the final girl in a slasher film. Like her town was besieged by someone kind of like taking it over with corporate interest, and a slasher was on the loose trying to ensure that would never happen. And Winnie ends up as the final girl. Like, she survives the night that a lot of her friends were murdered, but a year later, when Christmas falls again, she's not feeling the Christmas spirit. She's like, you know, I survived, but, you know, I feel guilt about all that. You know, I stopped the slasher, but everyone else is dead, and I feel terrible, and I wish I had never been born. And that's when you cue the It's a Wonderful Life scenario, in which Winnie gets to visit a Christmas world in which not only was she not born, but the killer was never stopped. So it's basically, it's the same deal as like Totally Killer, where it's like, instead of someone going back in time to stop a slasher, this is It's a Wonderful Life, but, you know, going into a different version of a world without you to stop a slasher villain, realizing that, oh yeah, life would actually be better if you stopped the slasher villain. and on that level, it's kind of clever. It's a pretty okay slasher film for the most part here. I almost kind of wish though that it did lean a bit more into absurd territory, because for the most part I feel like it sticks to a fairly grounded slash, I mean, outside of like the It's a Wonderful Life scenario, it's a fairly, standard, like, slasher plot of like, oh, we think we know who the killer is, but it's not really the killer, and there might be other people involved, there might be a bigger conspiracy. It's not a bad plot, but I feel like, you could do more of this, especially when you have like Joel McHale playing Winnie's father, and he doesn't really do a whole lot with the role. As opposed to you have Justin Long playing the guy who wants to basically turn the town evil, and he's trying. Like Long knows how to ham up his role, but he's hamming it up like as much as he can, and I don't really feel like the script gives him much to do with that material. So Justin Long is fine, but the more that he tries to like ham up his role, just kind of okay, it feels like there should be a little bit more for him, more written for him to like, have more fun with this character. And it's not quite there. And it feels like kind of like Justin Long is kind of, putting in like, the extra effort into making, his few scenes kind of more absurd. And they kind of work in bits and pieces. Like I said, it goes on a little bit, for lack of a better term, it goes on a little bit long with Justin Long, that I feel like, okay, we've rolled with this enough. Okay, can we get back to the slasher plot here? But yeah, for being a slasher plot with, It's a Wonderful Life, it's fairly clever. I wish it had more creativity, but for the most part, it's a this may sound weird to call the film this, but it's a cute slasher film. It's a cute slasher film in that it finds something to do with It's a Wonderful Life. It stages a slasher film on Christmas in kind of a clever way. It has some teen drama here and there with some romances that are formed and some conflicts about, trying to, prove yourself to your friends and all that. And it ultimately wraps up with a pretty adorable little ending. So yeah, it's for lack, the best way I can describe it is that it's a cute Christmas slasher, for whatever that may be worth. So yeah, It's a Wonderful Knife is currently playing on Shudder. So there we go. All right. So those were all the films. Let's do a quick recap of the films we reviewed. We reviewed American Fiction, a great racial and publishing and identity satire starring Jeffrey Wright. It's got a great script. It explores some interesting angles about how people perceive black literature and black people. And Jeffrey Wright is amazing in it. Watch it for him. He's fantastic. Reviewed Godzilla Minus One, the latest Japanese Godzilla film, which has an amazing human story, and it's easily one of the best Godzilla films of the 21st century, especially if you're someone who's never been big into Godzilla films. If you never dug the giant monster genre, I'm telling you, watch this one. It is the best film. You'll be surprised how much you love the human story. I also reviewed Anatomy of a Fall, the courtroom drama about a woman who may or may not have murdered her husband. It's kept beautifully ambiguous throughout and very fascinating and very intriguing. Expertly shot, fantastic performance by Sandra Hüller. I hope that she gets considered for awards consideration. I reviewed Ferrari, the latest film from Michael Mann about the life of Enzo Ferrari during the late 1950s, which he tried to prove himself and his company. Despite some of the accents not quite working in the film, it's a mostly intriguing film about focusing on this guy who had a troubled life trying to live up to the legacy for his company and his family, and felt like he was constantly failing, which he arguably kind of did. I also reviewed The Zone of Interest, a Holocaust drama about a Nazi family living just outside a concentration camp. It is haunting, it is horrifying, and it's fascinating, and it's absolutely a must-watch film, despite how hard it is to get through. I'll say that. I reviewed Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, which is also a hard film and horrifying. No, I'm kidding. It's a fine animated film, but I mean, for an Aardman film, I expect a little bit more from them, and all I can really compliment them on here is the great animation with a plot that is just kind of feels like another retread of the first Chicken Run film, and you kind of feel like Aardman can do better than that, for script-wise. And finally, I reviewed It's a Wonderful Knife, the slasher film that takes It's a Wonderful Life and basically depicts it with a final girl trying to stop a slasher killer on Christmas. It's cute, it's adorable, it's streaming on Shudder right now. So going over everything for release dates, the stuff that's playing in theaters right now is Godzilla Minus One, Anatomy of a Fall, and The Zone of Interest. I should clarify though, the Zone of Interest and American Fiction are both in limited release right now. American Fiction will be expanding this Friday. The Zone of Interest will be expanding more in January, and Ferrari will be opening on, I believe, Christmas, I believe. So there you go. Got some early reviews there, and that's out of way too many. Like stuff I didn't even get to cover here, which I might cover next time. What I got here? Maestro on Netflix. What else did we got here? I was thinking about May December. I'm debating whether I should cover it or not. But there's a few others that I'm debating whether or not to cover here. Well, I covered American Fiction, so there you go. But yeah, there's plenty more coming. I'm going to try to have another stream before Christmas, just so that there's a few more films to cover, some big films worth covering that I want to talk about. Namely, I want to talk about Hayao Miyazaki's new film, The Boy and the Heron, which is in theaters right now, and I have seen it. I want to review it. I also want to talk about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which I'll be seeing on Wednesday, so I'll try to have a review for it on Thursday. And what else we got? Oh, we've got the new Illumination film coming out on Christmas, Migration, which I do have some interesting things to say about that as well. That and probably a whole bunch of other films. I think probably Wonka. I'm going to try to cover Wonka. And then basically sorting through all the other screeners trying to determine what I should cover. So yeah, it's getting close to the end of the year, so a lot of films that I've been covering here, and too many to count. So if you want to stay informed on all the films coming out this year, because I will be doing a best of list, and I will be covering a lot of the award ceremonies as well as trying to cover the Oscars, be sure to subscribe to this channel to keep updated on the latest movies, so you know what to go see at the theater this weekend, or keep an eye out for this award season. And if you like early reviews like this, be sure to like the video as well. If you want to read any of my written reviews, you can read them over at movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. Over at movieswithmark.com, I believe I have a written review of Godzilla Minus One is over there, and on filminquiry.com this week there should be a review of Disney's Wish. I know I'm a little bit late to the game. I was trying to get some other stuff done. But also, I did want to mention opening this week also in theaters. I know on December 22nd, there's a lot of stuff opening in theaters, big Christmas release date for a whole bunch of stuff. But one film I don't want anyone to miss that you need to see is Poor Things. Poor Things, it opened earlier this month in limited release. It is going to be expanding into theaters nationwide on December 22nd. It's a Yorgos Lanthimos film, which is basically... The way I've been describing it, the easiest way to describe it, is basically it's Frankenstein's monster, but with lots of sex and very horny. And it is easily the best Yorgos Lanthimos film I've seen, and the best film I've seen this year. So if you want to catch up on some of the best movies of this year, one of them is opening this weekend. It is Poor Things. Go see it if you have the chance. I know there's a lot opening this weekend, but trust me, you are going to want to see Poor Things. It is definitely one of the best films this year. And that's out of a lot. Like I said, I loved American Fiction, and that's also coming out this weekend. And there's probably a few other films that depending on, how things shape up with Aquaman and what I have to say about Migration. Yeah, we'll see. But definitely don't miss out on Poor Things. Don't miss out. All right, so yeah, I will be back later. Probably later in the week, but if not, probably the week after to cover more of the films from this year. So yeah, if you want more of this, stay tuned, alright? Alright, have a good one, everybody.